Welcome, Venerable.
So sorry, everyone.
Welcome, Venerable.
Well, I'll tell you what happened. I'm sick.
I hear it.
I went to lie down to have a rest and I went to sleep. So I'm so sorry. I just woke up. I'm
Oh my
so sorry.
goodness.
You're all there. Yeah, you're all there. Look, I can't see you very well. My glasses are. No, I've got this kind of. I thought I had COVID. I had all the symptoms, but when I tested, I was negative. But it's like maybe it's just the flu or something. So there you go. So I'm so sorry. I went to sleep and I forgot. That's my confession. So I'm
No
here.
problem.
All right, darlings.
We're just so happy that you're here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here. I have to make up for time. Thank you, darlings. Happy to see you
Yes,
all.
you too.
Okay.
People in the chat suggested that we should give you the night off, but I mean, it's up to you, Venerable, whether
Oh, darling, what?
People in the chat are suggesting that we should give you the night off.
No, I'm fine. I'm here. I was just telling you what happened. I'm totally fine. I'm not well, but I'm fine. I'm happy to be here. Come on. Thank you, darling. So kind. So this just shows, you see, close to death. But my glasses, for some reason, I can't see anything. I don't know what's happened. You know, you're all there, hopefully. Okay, darlings, let's go. Come on, let's do our little mantra, whatever we're going to do.
Yes.
Yeah, look, so, okay, we're going to offer a mandala. This mandala offering, and this is the universe, all the objects of the universe, all the good things in the universe that make people happy. We imagine piling them all up and offering to the Buddha as a request for the teachings. Okay.
Sashi Paki Yukching Metu Sami Ravlinji Nire Gyanpadi Sangye Shindu Mekche Ovaki Rokunanda Shingla Chepak Shuk Jetsun Lama Dampa Kienam Keche Kikala Kense Che Sintri Jita Sampe Du Desi Mala Sakye Che Kijapa Vaktu So Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kami Atayami. And Venerable, you on mute.
Just a second, wait. Just a moment.
I'm screen sharing the refuge prayer for you.
Okay.
Venerable. Do you wish me to chant it?
No, it's okay.
Okay.
So we think we're gonna listen to these teachings, thinking this, so that we can take some tools from it, advice from it, so we can learn about how to live well, so we can die well, so we can continue to take a perfect human rebirth, bare minimum, so we can never give up becoming a Buddha, so we can benefit sentient beings. Thinking this is why we're here together. Sangye Charan Soke Tonam La Jantu Badu Dagni Kyapsu Chin Dagi Chernyen Gipe Sonam Ki Drola Penche Sangye Drupa Shok Sangye Charan Soke Tonam La Jantu Badu Dagni Kyapsu Chin Dagi Chernyen Gipe Sonam Ki Drola Penche Sangye Drupa Shok Sangye Charan Soke Tonam La Jantu Badu Dagni Kyapsu Chin Dagi Chernyen Gipe Sonam Ki Drola Penche Sangye Drumpa Shog. Okay, so I think, like we talked last week, you know, just a second, hang on a minute. Just a minute, I'm looking for the course notes. Looking for the course notes. Where are they? Here we go. Okay. So, all right. I think one of the things we made, the key points we said last week you know, the fundamental point in Buddhism. Okay, there's a way you can be a Buddhist and you never even have to think about rebirth. There's so many ways you can be a Buddhist. So many ways you can learn about impermanence without even thinking about death. You can learn about, you know, you can learn about the mind. You can learn about the delusion. You can really, there's a lot of Buddhism you can use without thinking about future and past lives. But if you have the bigger picture, if you want the big picture in Buddhism, the whole scenario, you know, we have to understand what Buddha means about what the mind is, and we have to understand how it's beginningless, and we have to understand all the different realms of existence. That's the big picture. And of course, for many people in the West who are Buddhists, they're not interested in that. You know, lots of people like Buddhism, but like meditation, for example. Lots of people like even the idea of impermanence. You can learn about that, but you don't. But the bigger picture is the key thing, and that's where, you know, of course, in the Tibetan Buddhist view, that's absolutely fundamental. You know. So I think we talked this last week, that the whole, the idea to get our head around is what the mind is and where it comes from. And that, of course, brings in the view of karma, which is huge, you know. So like we've talked, you know, as we know from the previous modules, Buddha's view of the universe is that there are trillions and trillions and trillions of sentient beings. That we all, and that the essence of it is that the essence of the whole Buddhist view is that there is trillions of sentient beings, all these mind possessors. These minds are not the handiwork of a creator. These minds are not physical. These minds are not coming from parents. This is the most fundamental point. And then so if that's true, then where does our mind come from? It comes from previous moments of itself, which means it comes before this life. And what happens when it dies, it will continue. I mean, the Mahayana Buddhist view is the mind is beginningless and endless. Like I mentioned, some of the Buddhist teachings would even say that the mind ends when you've achieved nirvana, but not for the Mahayana view, not for the Prasangika view. Your mind is beginningless and endless. And so what drives this mind, as we've been talking, and we're going to go into more detail when we get to that module, what drives those minds, the law within which these minds run, the law that runs these minds is this law of karma, you know. Everything we think and do and say produces the person we become. Produces the person we become. We are the creator of ourselves. This is the basic idea. So the one, you know, like I said, I think last week, one of the key things to get used to is this idea, try to think about the logic of beginninglessness, the logic of cause and effect that would mean that the mind therefore can't begin in some moment, can't come from somewhere else, can't be given to you by somebody, can't come from nothing. It's a continuity of mental moments that logically, if it's the law driven by the law of cause and effect, has to be beginningless. As crazy as that idea sounds to us, you know. And so the whole idea of death, so like we talked about, you know, in the Lam Rim, the reason is in the very first stages of the practice is actually the reasoning is because impermanence is Buddha's, one of his first teachings is impermanence. And it's necessarily more easy to understand than emptiness. Emptiness is, you know, Buddha's talking about, like I said, one of the key things in Buddhism is he's talking about how things do exist. And he's trying to get us in touch with how things do exist. So one of the first mistakes we make is we grasp at things as not changing because we don't want things to change. So one of these first teachings, therefore, is talking about impermanence. But why Atisha, in his little text that the Lam Rim is based on, talks about death is because that's Atisha's agenda is to give us a wake-up call, you know. There's more than just merely understanding that things change. We can understand that by understanding, you know, computers change and gardens change and houses change and relationships change. Yes, indeed, they're all driven by the law of impermanence. But the key thing here is to get a wake-up call, not to waste this precious life. That's the particular extra point here, why Atisha talks about, and therefore why in the Lam Rim the point is about death, particular impermanence of this person. Because Atisha wants to give us the wake-up call, not to want to waste this precious life. That's the reason behind it, why death, you know. So there's two ways, like I mentioned last week, there are two ways to live within to get in touch with the impermanence of death. One is to factor that into your life. This is the most fundamental one. This is what comes into the Lam Rim. This first point, you know, and I said it's like it's divided up into 9 points. The first is that death is definite, to think about how death is definite. The second point is that death, the 3 main points, and they each got 3 points themselves, you know. And in your course notes, I'm quite sure Nick Rebush goes into this in detail. So I hope you've all studied it. You know, the time that death is definite. The time of death, which is more, the heavy duty, the point that really is the wake-up call is that the time of death is not definite. And the concluding point, the third point, which is the conclusion of these first two, is given that our mind is beginning, given that our mind is beginningless, that it comes from a previous life, given that everything we think and do and say is either negative or positive and produce either happiness or suffering, and given that we do want happiness and don't want suffering, and given that our mind will end, we'll leave it. We'll leave this body when we die and take another rebirth. Given all that, the fundamental point is to understand what is useful at the time of death. It's a really practical point, It's a very practical issue. And of course, given the Buddha's view that our mind is beginningless and what we think and do and say produces the person we become, and that we do want happiness and don't want suffering, then it follows logically, that the only thing that is of any benefit to us when we die, the only thing that's any benefit to us at the time our mind leaves the body is the virtuous imprints in the mind, So so to really appreciate this point, I know when I first heard about talking about death, and how we're going to die and how we're going to take another rebirth, it doesn't sound so exciting. It doesn't sound so kind of relevant to us. We wonder why, who cares, like, who cares? What's it matter? I mean, what's it matter, I mean, even some people say, well, if we've been in the lower realms countless lifetimes before, but we come into this life now, but we don't remember the past lives, what does it matter? Who cares, So it takes us a while, I think. I'm so sorry. I'm doing my best here. It takes a while to sort of get our head around why it's important, to get us, in other words, to get a teacher's driving us to get us kind of a wake-up call, but it takes us a while to hear it as a wake-up call. It takes us a while to do that for some reason. I don't know why. To see it, to develop the sense of urgency. All that I was saying, when we really begun to even realize this basic fact of impermanence, that this life is short, that we're going to die at any moment, and to develop this sense of urgency, not to waste the life, which is the fundamental point, from thinking about impermanence, to not want to waste this life. For some reason, this takes time for us. I don't know why. But the Lamas all say, when we get a sense of urgency and don't want to waste this life, then we're really on track, And what strengthens that, of course, is when we think about karma, that everything we think and do and take produces the person we become. This is the thing, just sort of slowly these points dawn on us as we think about them, So the first way to bring impermanence into your life is literally that. Live your life within the reality that it's impermanent. Live your life within the reality that you could die today or you could die at any moment, because the time of death is uncertain, And then you live your life within that way. And then there's a sense of urgency, and you don't waste your life. But the other way to prepare for death, and I think I want to start that today, is to learn about this, to how to die properly, how to die well. And that particularly comes from the Vajrayana teachings, this way of describing the process of death. So let's talk about that today and see where that goes, Because as you know, I mean, one of the books that I'm recommending very highly that you get and read and study and think about, which is Lama Zopa's book, How to Face Death Without Fear. But the way when it was first published, it's been redone now, re-edited. The first, it was how to help your loved ones, how to help your loved ones. The whole book is written from the point of view of helping your loved ones die, because there's advice about what to do when you're sick, when you're old, and so on and so forth. But of course, the advice is for oneself, And if we know ourselves how we can die well, then we know how to help others die well. And as I said, the whole point of Lama Zopa's book, the entire point from the point behind all the advice in the book, the point behind all the advice in the book is to help a person at the time of death, which is when the process actually starts, which I want to start discussing tonight. When the death process starts, which can be a couple of hours before you stop breathing, often longer than that, but typically a couple of hours. But the most important thing is at that time, when the karmic seed is triggered, that will determine your future life, which is in that process a couple of hours before you stop breathing, that is a virtuous karmic seed, one of your virtuous karmic seeds from all your millions of karmic seeds in your mind. That this is the crucial point, the whole point, whether it's a baby, an ant, a dog, your grandmother, to help a person navigate that period to ensure that their mind is virtuous and peaceful, which is the condition that is necessary such that when the karmic seed is triggered, it will be a positive karmic seed. And then that will then program the person and give them a decent future rebirth. You know, that's the point behind that's the point. And that's why, to help anybody at the time of death. So let's talk about then the death process. Okay. I'm sure it's in your course notes. In fact, has to be. Let's see. Yeah, right. Certainly down there is a meditation, the actual death process. And Lama Yeshe's, yeah, it's chapter 10 there. And must have been in one of the sessions, Nick's teachings. And that's why I'm saying I really recommend you read Nick's course notes. They're very extensive. They cover everything. And the other teachings as well, you know, from the other people there. Okay, so let's just discuss this process, right? It's based upon the Vajrayana teachings, which are different from these sutra teachings, you know. The Vajrayana teachings talk about the whole universe in terms of physical matter being made of the 4 elements. We talk about this all the time. I mention this all the time. That the physical world is made of the 4 elements, earth, air, fire, and water. And then we have minds and matter are basically the components of the universe. You know, there are trillions upon trillions of minds, and all minds are inextricably linked to their own set of the 4 elements. This is just the way the Vajrayana model is, the way it describes the universe, you know. So this death process is described in 8 stages. So typically, Kunta Lama Zopa, typically it's a couple of hours before you stop breathing. There always can be exceptions, of course, but this is the general situation. A couple of hours before you stop breathing, this is the beginning of this process. And basically what it is a process of deconstruction of the components of a person. The process of the deconstruction. They call it the dissolution process, you know, or when gradually each of the components ceases functioning, and there are certain things that occur at each of these stages. In fact, it's a meditation that one can learn to do, you know. In fact, it's one of the meditations you need to do. So basically, this view, the Vajrayana model, talks about how we've got gross consciousness, which is basically, it's our sensory consciousness. Basically our sensory consciousness, and we have gross body, and they come inextricably together. So your gross body, and obviously you know, you have an eyeball, you have the sensory, you have the senses, the physical body, the ears, the nose, the eyes, and so on and so forth, and you have the various levels of sensory consciousness that are linked to these parts of your body. So clearly you can't have an eye. So eye consciousness isn't referring to the eyeball. Your ability to cognize shape and color, which is your eye consciousness, it depends upon, doesn't it, a proper working eyeball. Your ability to cognize sound depends upon the various bits and pieces of the physical body working properly, so you can have a cognition of sound. So you've got the sensory consciousnesses, the eye consciousness, ear consciousness, nose consciousness, tactile consciousness, it's, you know, tongue consciousness, for example. And then you have the body upon which these depend for their functioning properly. So this is the gross consciousness and the gross body. And the first 4 stages of the gradual deconstruction or the ceasing of each of these components, along with various other components. The way they describe this death process is, in fact, there are 25 components of a person, that five at each of these 4, the first 4, 5 of each of the 4 stages, about 5 things stop functioning. 20, maybe 4, I can't remember. We'll go through the process. Let me get the meditation here, Nick's meditation, page 144. Page 144. See if we go through it here together. Oh, now I've lost it. Sorry. No, I've lost it. Where is it? Where it is? 144. Let's see what it is. Maybe it's different. Yeah, okay, so this is final meditation first. So this is okay. All right. So it touches on it here, yes. So this is done as a meditation. So I'll just mention the points as we go. So the first thing to cease is the grossest of the four elements. And that's the earth element, you know. That ceases to function. By the way, something that's so interesting is that this process of the so-called death process is exactly the same thing that happens physiologically and psychologically every time you go to sleep. This is what's most interesting. And it's why the great yogis utilize their process of going to sleep to the subtle level, you know, through going through the gross level of the senses functioning to get to the subtle level of mind. They actually utilize, and the greatest yogis can do that. You can utilize your sleep. You can practice going through these stages when you go to sleep. I mean, most of us aren't conscious, are we? You lie down and then you wake up 8 hours later. You know, you're not aware of this gradual process. It's quite subtle. But it's interesting, it's the same thing that occurs. There's no difference. Except obviously death is more dramatic, you know. So the first thing is the earth element. And one of the consequences of that is that your body becomes kind of, one of the things is your body becomes kind of heavy. Your body becomes very heavy. You know, and you know that when you're tired, you feel like lead, don't you? Or when you wake, you know, when you wake up in the morning, when your earth element is coming back to function, you feel so heavy. You know, your body feels like lead. We know that experience. It says here, one of the signs of it is that you feel very like you feel under like a great weight. You feel like you're sinking, actually. I remember when I was very sick in India, this is back in the 80s, I think, and I had hepatitis and malaria, and one old lama said I was close to death. I mean, you don't know you're close to death, you just know you feel terrible. But I know that I had that experience when I felt I was sinking into the bed, you know. That's a sign that the earth element is ceasing. Then the next one, so the earth element ceases. At each of these four stages also, the five aggregates, you know, these five components that we're made up of, according to Buddha's teachings, the sutra. Each one of these is also ceasing to function. So the first one is the aggregate of form, which is your physicality. Then the element is also the earth element ceases. Then your eye consciousness beginning to cease. And we all know this experience. I know I mention this often, you know, when you're really tired and you're awake and you're talking to your friend and you are awake and you're sitting up and you're really tired, you feel like you can't see properly, isn't it? You're almost exhausted, you're unable to see properly. You haven't gone to sleep yet, but your eyes become unable to function properly. This is what happens. This capacity to see gets weaker. That's three things cease. And then also your what's happening? And also they say at each one of these stages there's this type of there's a subtle thing that occurs that only the great yogis, the great meditators are actually conscious of, but we have to practice being aware of. That's why it's good to do it as a meditation. This is led here as a meditation. You imagine each of these stages, you say them to yourself. Now this happens, now that happens, now this happens. So the first of these 8 stages, and each of these 8 stages typically are described, are labeled in terms of this particular subtle vision, as they call it, that occurs. And this first one is called a vision of a mirage. So if you think about what a mirage is, it's the experience of, like, it seems to be an experience of the interplay between earth and water, isn't it? Like that shimmering, you know. Well, they say it's like a mirage. So the earth element has now ceased, and now the second stage occurs. And now the feeling aggregate, this ability to distinguish between pleasure and pain and indifference, this ceases to function. The ear consciousness ceases. Now, again, you know that experience. You're sitting there talking to your friend and you're really tired. And you just, you missed the last 5 seconds of what they said. You literally didn't hear it. Or often that can happen. You go to teachings in the hours and hours of teachings and you're going to sleep. And you didn't hear what the teacher said, you know. That's our experience. So gradually these parts of us that are usually bright and sharp when we're wide awake and wound up, these are ceasing to function. So the feeling aggregate, the ear consciousness ceases, and then the water element begins to dry up. All the liquids in your body, they begin to dry up, you know. You know, when you wake up in the morning, you wake up first thing in the morning, you're totally dry. It's because the water element is about to come back again, you know, and it's not quite functioning properly. So the feeling aggregate, the ability to distinguish between pleasure, pain, and difference ceases to function. You can't distinguish between the three. Whereas normally in daily life, there's a vivid difference between these three. The ear consciousness ceases to function, begins to cease to function. Then the water element ceases to function, and then there's the kind of the vision, they call it, is like a vision. And this is the interplay, say, of water. I need water. Reminds me, I need my drink. Hang on a second. Please forgive me. I don't know where it is now. No idea. Forget about it. To forget about my water. Sorry. Totally unprepared tonight. I'm so sorry. So then, you know, the water element, the feeling, ear consciousness, the water element, and then the sign, the subtle sign, they say, oh no, get water. I'll be okay. It's all right. If I faint, then you can start panicking, okay? I'm not going to faint, I promise. I'm all right. Don't feel sorry for me. Anyway, shut up. So then the sign, the subtle sign, is like a sign, it's like an interplay of water and fire. They say it's like kind of smoky, you know. Lama Zopa describes it very nicely in his How to Face Death Without Fear book. So by this point, this is a very interesting point now. Lama Zopa talks about this. And I don't think it's mentioned here, but Lama Zopa talks, there's a whole chapter in Lama Zopa's book about, at the same time, you see, from this, there's different descriptions of what happens at death. One is according to the sutra practice, the sutras, and that's a particular way, and Lama Zopa talks about this, the 12 links of dependent arising. They're functioning every second of daily life, but they have a particular role at the time of death. So then this, and then they've got this Vajrayana one. Well, at the same time, what's happening is at about this time, or maybe by the third stage, the second stage already, the ears starting to go, but you've still got, at this point, you've still got your wits about you. You're not unconscious yet. You can still move your body. You know, you might be able to hear a little bit, but you're beginning to lose these different faculties, but you haven't lost your wits completely. So it's about this point. At this point, it seems, this is the crucial time. This is the time that, if you look at the sutra, the 12 links, the 8th and 9th of the 12 links are called craving and grasping. So these are occurring every second of the day because they're just both attachment. And there's a particular way they function. You know, every second of the day, craving and then grasping kick in. And these are at death, they're particularly powerful levels of this attachment. So at the time of death, as Lama Zopa says, the main reason we have so much fear at the time of death is because of this intense attachment. So at this point in the death process, this craving and grasping, the 8th and the 9th, kick in extra strongly, extra more powerfully. And why there's so much fear is because of attachment. So attachment, one of its functions, attachment's multifaceted, okay? But one of the functions of attachment is to hold on to something, isn't it? Not to let go of something, afraid of losing something. Another function of attachment is looking forward to something. This is a very interesting point. Another function of attachment is always looking forward to something. Now, you think about this. If your materialism is your main philosophy and you have no view, or you have a view that there's nothing after death, think about this. You know, throughout our life, you think about this, attachment's constantly functioning, and it's functioning in, as I said, a multitude of ways. But one of the key ways our attachment keeps us going in our daily life, we're always looking forward to something else. You wake up in the morning, you look forward to breakfast, and you look forward to lunch, then you look forward to the afternoon, then you look forward to the evening, then you look forward to next week, and then you look forward to your vacation, then you look forward to your retirement. This is what preoccupies our minds, never stopping. We can see the nightmare of it is always projecting something into the future. And look at what depression is. When you have aversion, depression, there's nothing. Think about this. When a person has nothing to look forward to, that's why you sink into profound depression. So what keeps us going all our lives, but apart from our virtues, apart from goodness and kindness and compassion, but from the deluded point of view, is this constant attachment, always looking forward to something. And why? Because we're never satisfied with what we've got now. So always keeping ourselves buoyant. Oh, now I'll do this, and now I'll have that, and now I'll go there, and now I'll do this, and now I'll do that. And this is never ending, never stopping, never stopping. So at the time of death, it's like, because, you know, Buddha would say we've died countless lifetimes before. We've got the experience of death in our mind, but we don't remember it. But the build up to it and the fear of it has built up in our mind. So there's this primordial fear. I mean, we notice we can't even stand the word death in our culture, you know. This primordial fear of what? Because if you're a materialist, there is literally nothing to look forward to. There's no longer anything to look forward to. So the fear is tremendous, you know. The fear, and it's utterly instinctive. No one trains you in this. You don't get taught it. It's primordially deep because attachment is so deep. And that's why there's fear. The fear of losing what you've got. And then if you really have this view of materialism, which means just why you don't want to think about death, because how can you think about disappearing? You don't know how to articulate that, just falling into some black hole. It's really quite primordial, the fear for most people, you know. And this is what's interesting in Lama Zopa's book. He mentions here that actually you can, if you've got, let's say you're helping your mother die, and let's say she's a Christian, you know, and you can really help her by talking about looking forward to going to heaven. It's attachment, but it's skillful means. You use your attachment. You use your attachment. You know, and so the same if you're a Buddhist, at least you look forward to another decent human rebirth, as abstract as that might be sounding to us, you know. At least then you're using your attachment to prevent this primordial fear. Because you've got to, and then you see, because the deepest, most instinctive attachment is to hold on to this one. And because this one, meaning the body, is what is in our materialist world, is all we mean by me. There is nothing else but the body, is there? This is just me. As far as we're concerned, this is me, you know? And the deepest fear is not being me, of losing me. It's totally primordial. And there's this fear at this point when this craving and grasping kick in at extra strong levels around about the second or third stage of death. This is the time that's crucial, because the interesting point is when the craving is intense attachment to hold on to this, and then grasping depends on that's what triggers the number 2 of the 12 links, which is the one which is the karmic seed. We've got these millions of karmic seeds in our mind. You know, everything we think and do and say sows seeds in our mind. So a particular seed that's going to ripen at this point is triggered at this point, and grasping is actually the catalyst that triggers it. So even if you're being virtuous, the grasping is still going to be there. But if there's only fear that comes, only fear or anger, or, you know, if that completely overcomes your mind, then that's going to trigger a negative karmic seed. And then that will determine you're going to suffer in future rebirth. That's why you need to help people die well, because most of us aren't great yogis and yoginis. You know, you don't need to help them. You just leave them alone. They know what they're doing. But most of us need support. This is why the crucial job of helping people die, you know, as Lama Zopa says in his book. Excuse me, I have to get some water. I'm so sorry. What a mess I am today. I'm so sorry.
No, please do. Please do. No problem.
Okay, so at this point, like I said, then this grasping, that kicks in, and that's an even more intense level of attachment than the craving. That's the trigger. That's what triggers the karmic seed to be. Well, that's the catalyst, if you like, that triggers the karmic seed that will determine your future life. It's at that point, as Lama Zopa says in his book, the time, if you want to help anybody in their life, the time they need you most is right this second. This is kind of weird for us in the West to think this way. You know, it's so peculiar to think this way. What do you mean help people at the time of death? As far as we're concerned in the West, is, you know, people, we even now, it's so common you hear that people hasten people's death. You know, people help people die more quickly. We help our cats and dogs die. We kill them half the time, you know, because we think somehow death in life is now over. It doesn't matter. You know, that's why we just do not value dying people. Can't stand the thought of dying people. It's the whole point when you take the biggest picture in Buddhist view, continuity of consciousness, karma, and that we take another rebirth, then this is then you'll understand why it's crucial to help a person right at this time. Because basically the mind needs to be peaceful. The grasping is going to happen no matter what. Even if you're a high being, if you're not really that advanced, fear will still be there. But if you can work with a person, the condition is perfect, their room is very peaceful, there aren't any troublemakers around, you're able to help them focus, you're saying mantras to them, or whatever it is that you know, you're helping the person be, and that's including your animal, you know. By having mantras, playing quietly is the most precious way you can help your animal at the time of death, you know. But because we think, I mean, one of our things in the world, we can see this in the modern world, you know, if a person's in pain, we give them painkillers. And you look at them, they're drugged out of their brain, and we say, oh, look at them, aren't they peaceful? Well, no, not at all. You can be when your mind is, when you're unconscious, when your grosser consciousness is not functioning, especially if you've been drugged, then your subtle mind is functioning. And so, you know, as you can medicate physical pain, but you cannot medicate mental anguish. You can't medicate person freaking out. So even if they're unconscious, if they were freaked out when they were awake, they're going to be freaked out in their subtle consciousness. It's not going to help to die like that. You know, and this is why it's so sad the way we are in the West. We think you drug a person out of their brain, they're peaceful. You stop their pain, they're okay, you know. They might look nice, but that doesn't mean they're peaceful at all. In fact, the ideal is not to be drugged out. The ideal is to be conscious. So you can, by listening to the mantras, by, you know, even your pussycat. So by hearing the mantras, by hearing, you know, having a person be with you, helping you stay secure, helping you stay calm, you know. This is the most precious gift that you can give a person. Help them before the death, and then at this time, so that their mind, because the point is, we can see, when you understand this, you know, you can see that when you're afraid, when there's fear in the mind, when there's fear, you can't cope. You're freaking out. You just can't cope, you know. Hang on. So, you know, when you're afraid, I always think of this example, and it sounds such a silly example, but you listen to it. You know, when you're a little girl, little boy, whatever, and you're freaking out, something went wrong, you know, and you burst into tears, like as if the whole world is collapsing, isn't it? You're having a panic attack, basically. And you think about this, if you're so fortunate to have a mother or some, you know, what do you think you do? You instantaneously run to your mother, and you look up into her eyes, and you're crying as if the whole world has collapsed, because you're freaking out. So we know ourselves, when something happens that's bad, the first thing we do is we turn to somebody to help us. Do you understand that? It's so primordial, because we don't know how to handle things when they go wrong. So we need someone to support us. And this is what I find so profound. You're screaming like as if the world has collapsed. If your mother is a wise mother, you know what she'll do? She will tell you, oh, it's all right, sweetheart, everything's okay. She makes you feel better. Suddenly your fear dissipates, because suddenly someone is telling you everything is okay. And you know what? You believe her. She didn't change anything. She just told you everything is okay. That's why we need someone to support us, because when there's fear, we're completely irrational. We lose all common sense. And because we don't have resources, because we haven't practiced, when things go wrong, we have panic attacks, basically. and we don't know what to do. So we immediately turn to somebody. I remember, I remember when I was at Kopan one time. I don't normally live with people, I'm a nun, I don't have husbands and babies and all those things. So I was in Kopan, and when I was staying there, and my room was next to Annie Fran. Some of you must know Annie Fran. And I spent time with Annie Fran. She's my friend, And I fell down the stairs on the way down to my room. I fell like a half a dozen concrete stairs and fell really badly and hurt my back. And I cried out, "Fran!" Because I knew she was there, I wouldn't have called out if she wasn't there, would I? But immediately something went wrong. You call out for somebody. Don't even dismiss this. This is really quite profound. This is how we are if we haven't worked on our minds. Because when something goes wrong, aversion arises, panic arises. And this is what's absolutely how death is, Most people die with fear, because there's no one, and this is what's so tragic. They have never thought about their lives. They haven't thought about impermanence. They maybe don't have a view about death. They've lived in denial of death like everybody does. It's not going to happen to me. I'm going to, die who knows when. I'm a living person, not a dying person, all this stuff. Finally, this time has come. And there you are at an old people's home, drugged out of your brain with television blasting through your ears all day and night. No one's helping you. No one's supporting you. Don't know what to think. It would be unbearable way to die, Unbearable. And that's how most people die. Animals die like that. The poor wild animals, look at them, living in total fear. But our trouble is when it's our pussycat, because, we mean well, but because we don't have a view of reincarnation, we think we've got to kill our pussycat. Of course, we don't call it that. It's too brutal. We call it putting it down or something. But basically, we've got to help a person navigate that experience, and including your pet. So one of the most powerful ways to help. Lama Zopa's book is full of these different pieces of advice, mostly practices that can help the person who's dying. The weeks and months before, the days before, the hours before, at the time the breath stops, at the time the mind leaves, and the weeks after death. There's a whole series of things we can do, to help the person's mind. Why? To help them go from this life to at least a decent future human rebirth. That's the bottom line. That's the point of all of it, That's the whole point. So it's so focused to think this way. I know in our culture, it's so marvelous. I'm really moved by this. And I've talked in many different conferences, in the medical profession, people now more and more talking about these things and helping people die well, and having conferences and people electing to work in the hospice movement. It's really wonderful, but it's usually not about what happens after the person dies. It's to make it conducive for the family and for people to be harmonious and for the person to die in a peaceful environment. But usually it's not dealing with what happens after the person dies, because that's what we call religion. That's people's private business, they say, of course it is. But that's marvelous. People are confronting death more, not living in denial of it, and trying to help it be a better situation for everybody. But the point, of course, for the Buddhist view is just everything is for the benefit of the person dying, So at this point, about the second, and then going into the third stage, about this point is when this grasping kicks in, the ninth link. And that is what triggers the second link, which is the karmic seed. This is the karmic seed you plant. Because every second you're dropping a karmic seed in one of your bank vaults, And what we want that grasping to do when you're helping the person be virtuous, so that they, relatively speaking, can be virtuous even when that grasping arises, because you're being virtuous, because you're listening to the Dharma, a person's there helping you stay peaceful, you're feeling more confident and more secure and more taken care of, so your mind is less fearful, then a virtuous karmic seed can be triggered. And this is the point. It's a logical thing that if the mind is freaking out, when the mind is freaking out, that's when delusions arise naturally. It's just naturally. So if the mind is freaking out, naturally a negative seed will be triggered. And if the mind is relatively peaceful and the conditions around you are enabling you to be peaceful at this point, then it enables a virtuous karmic seed to be triggered. And that's what we want for your cat, for the mouse, for the ant, for your grandmother, whether they're conscious or awake or not conscious, This is the period. So the third of these stages, now you're slowly losing, you're slowly losing the plot by this point. Your earth consciousness, your earth's element has ceased. Your eye consciousness is ceasing. Your ear consciousness is ceasing. Your water element ceasing. Your capacity to distinguish between pleasure, pain, and indifference is ceasing. And the next one, the third of these 8 stages, where's my book? The fire element ceases to function. The body begins to become cold. And what happens is the heat leaves the body gradually from the top down and from the feet up. And eventually everything comes to the heart chakra, which is where your very subtle consciousness is. And we'll go into that. That's what happens at the 8th stage. So the heat, and they say at this point, if the heat is leaving first through your head and your feet are still toasty and warm, that's not a good sign. That's a sign that a negative seed has been triggered and you're going to be reborn in the lower realms. But if the heat leaves your feet first and then your head after second, that's a good sign that a virtuous karmic seed has already been triggered. At the same time as the fire element, the third of the aggregates to cease functioning is called discrimination, which is the ability second by second to discriminate between this and that. Every second it's functioning. So now when you say you've got your beloved grandmother on one side of the bed and your ugly old auntie on the other side, by this point you can't discriminate. You don't know the difference. You can't tell who is who, You can no longer understand who is who. So gradually your mind is, all the bits and pieces of you are ceasing to function and you're gradually losing the plot. The third sign to occur, subtle vision, is like sparks, which is the interplay, isn't it, of fire, this element that's ceasing now, and the next one, which is the air element. So the 4th stage, and see, by this point, pretty much the karmic seed that will determine your next life has been triggered. And they say it's fairly easy to see by the way the person behaves. If they're not in a coma, you can tell by the behavior whether a negative seed or a positive seed has been triggered. Because like I mentioned this last week, a friend of mine, a Buddhist, was at our center in California in the 80s or 70s, 80s, and he fell off the roof. And he died in his wife's arms. And she said he was radiant and joyful. So that means what happened was there must have been virtue in his mind. And as his gross consciousness is gradually ceasing, when your gross consciousness is ceasing, your subtle consciousness, which is your mental consciousness, comes to the front. So as you're dying, your gross consciousness is ceasing. It's like you're able to almost like see into the future what your future rebirth will be. So he clearly died very blissfully, which is an indication that a virtuous karmic seed was triggered, and that he can literally, as Lama Zopa says in his book, it's like going towards the light. They literally say it like that. But if a negative seed has been triggered, it's like going towards the dark, and you can be completely fearful because you're seeing a lower realm rebirth coming. Like it looks like the person's hallucinating, but they're actually getting a vision of their future rebirth. So the mind freaks out completely. The person can be screaming, they still haven't, their body is still functioning. So it can be a really painful experience if a negative seed has been triggered. But if the person is peaceful, that's a sign, and they die peacefully, that's a sign that a virtuous karmic seed has been triggered. And the death will be very, very pleasant experience. If it's a negative seed, the death will be unbearable suffering, unbearable fear, unbearable suffering, That's how I'm saying. So the fourth one, the aggregate, is called the non-associated compounded phenomena, whatever that, never mind. So then that ceases. And then also now the ability to even distinguish who you are. You've lost the plot by this point. You don't know, as Lama Zopa says, usually you say a word, we understand it. We've got a sense of what it all means. But at this point, you can't put anything together. You've lost the plot, You don't even know who you are yourself. No idea. Your tactile consciousness begins to cease, and your tongue consciousness. The previous one, your nose consciousness ceased. This one, your final two, your tactile and your tongue consciousness. And the tongue, I always quote this, Geshe Rabten, one of Lama Zopa Lama Yeshe's gurus from Sarah J Monastery, I met one of my lamas, he said, at this point, the tongue, they say the tongue gets very short and kind of is blue at the root. And he said, at this point, that this tongue that spent its life gossiping is now useless. I love that. So this is the fourth of the 8 stages. And the vision at this point, they say it's like the last light, sort of like a bright light when a candle finishes. It's like the bluish sort of light when the candle goes out. So at this point, your earth element, water element, fire element, air element, your eye consciousness, ear consciousness, nose consciousness, tactile consciousness, tongue consciousness. In other words, all the indications of being a living person, you know, but this is just your gross body and your gross mind. So this, of course, is when in the West we think we're dead, because we don't posit anything subtler than this. You can't, you know, you can't see indications in any kind of instruments of life at this point. That's why it's so interesting that Dalai Lama, His Holiness, doing all these talks and work with so many scientists over the years, and so much of it's been published. You know, he talks about his scientist friends creating instruments that they put onto the, you know, some of His Holiness has given access to some of his yogi disciples who are yogis who know how to die properly, and they're wired up with these instruments, wired up somehow in order, because they're the scientists looking for signs of life at a subtle level in order to prove this point that Buddhism makes, you know. And like I told you, I always quote this. When I was editing Lama Zopa's book, I read a book by an American medical journalist called Nick Teresi, and it's called The Undead. And it was all the obstacles and problems and difficulties now in the American medical profession in relation to the whole business of cutting out organs, you know, suddenly, because people are showing that they're coming back to life. And it's really confusing now because they're no longer certain when death actually occurs, you know. And as one doctor who's in this business was quoted in this book as saying, I can now say with certainty that consciousness is not a function of the brain. I don't know what it is, but I can say that with certainty. So I think it's really marvelous that they're questioning their assumptions now, you know. So at this point, as far as Buddhism is concerned, certainly the Mahayana, the Vajrayana Buddhism, if you're a Zen Buddhist, you wouldn't learn about this. This is from the Vajrayana teachings. It's only the Tibetans who teach the Vajrayana teachings, you know. So this is why it's most important that Lama Zopa talks about that in his book, you know, if you're going to be helping a dying person in the weeks and months before, or even right at that time, the crucial thing is to have the conditions as suitable as possible, as conducive as you can for the person to be peaceful. And what that means is having a deep understanding of what attachment is. We don't have that in our culture. You know, so we would think having music on, having the animals there, having all their friends around, making them happy. But what we don't understand is this is just all that does is trigger unbelievable attachment in the person's mind. And that, you know, that's the worst thing possible at the time of death. But we don't even understand attachment in our culture. We confuse it with being happy. We confuse it with love, you know. So because attachment is a very powerful grasping at something, if you give attachment any of the objects of the 5 senses, it will cling to them, you know, frantically. So then the best way to help a dying person is to have nothing that will trigger their attachment around them. You leave the pets out. You leave the people they're very strongly attached to, not near them. You don't have music playing. You don't have the television blasting. The only things in that room should be things that will energize their mind to be peaceful and calm and virtuous. So if they're a Buddhist, you'd have Buddhist images. Everything in that room should be helping the person be virtuous, helping the person not be attached, you know. I mean, two examples I can think of. I mean, this is not, I mean, people often talk about in the West how, oh, she won't let go. You know, he can't let go because, you know, we're so caught up in thinking about our loved ones and all our things that literally keeps you, the attachment energized, like keeping you alive, you know. And it's not helpful for the mind. It's very distressing. So there's this one woman, I remember came to a course we did on this book, Lama Zopa's book. And she talked about how her and her friends were, you know, rotating, taking care of their dying friend. So this, you know, so they would normally, she was talking about how they had the pets in the room. They had the woman was a fan of Patsy Cline. So they had Patsy Cline music playing. There's lots of busyness in the room, lots of things happening. And when she heard the class about keeping the place peaceful and quiet, that evening, she told us the next morning when she came, that evening when it was her turn, she turned off the Patsy Cline music. She chucked out the pets. She kept the room really quiet and played mantras. And the woman died within an hour, because she was able to relax and calm down and not grasp at all the objects of attachment. This is what we just don't understand. I mean, you know, in old people's homes, you see people with a television on day and night. There's other example, I might have mentioned it. I went to help a friend, not a friend, I met her, and she was dying, had cancer, and you could tell she had a lot of fear. She knew a little bit about the lavas, and she liked Lama Yeshe, but her friends had the television on all the time. We think, oh, it's good for them. It distracts them, you know. It just keeps the attachment alive. And she was, you can tell she was really distressed, you know. So anyway, I was sat with her a while and just said a few mantras. And then when I left, I gave the people who were taking care of her a DVD or whatever you call it, an old-fashioned one, a video, whatever, the old-fashioned one with a tape of a Lama Yeshe teaching. And they told me later that they put it into the television to play it for her, but the television set broke. So there's nothing could play. Well, she died within an hour because suddenly her mind was able to calm down because there was nothing to cling to. This is incredibly important to understand. We don't understand this in our culture. We think, oh, have the pets in there and the music and make them happy, you know. We don't understand attachment. It's the opposite of what you need at the time of death, you know. It's the most incredibly intensely personal time you will ever have. And if you've got things out there and people out there distracting you, you can't focus internally. You can't even begin to be aware of what is going on. So our job as helpers is to be just totally peaceful and loving and supportive and kind and quiet. It's unbelievably important. As Lama Zopa says, this is education we all need, you know, how to help the person's mind. Which means you've got to know your own mind, which means you've got to understand at least a little bit how attachment works and fear. Unbelievably important, you know. So now, according to this view, the mind can stay in the body for up to 3 days. This is really typical. So the ideal scenario for a person, and from this Tibetan Buddhist, the Vajrayana point of view, is you don't touch the body for 3 days. I mean, this is a difficult point for most people, you know. I mean, when I was doing this book, I talked a lot to Yeshe Kado, an Australian nun who did run a big hospice service, palliative care in Brisbane in Australia. It's been going for like 30 years now. It's quite well known. They get government funding. They have, you know, many helpers who go out to homes to offer support for the dying person and the dying person's family, not just Buddhists, of course. And Yeshe Kado said that most people die in institutions. It used to be, I know when my grandmother died, she was a Catholic. She died at home. We kept her body there. The nuns would come and say prayers. That's the ideal scenario because that's the one you can control. But you think about it, I mean, with all due respect to nurses and doctors and hospitals, that's probably the worst possible place to die, about the worst. Because, you know, unless you've got enough money to afford a private room, you're going to be in this ward. You're going to hear clanging noises all day and night, other people's emotions, banging doors. It's the worst scenario possible to help a person be peaceful. It's just the worst. It's just the worst. The ideal is to be in a quiet environment, you know, and if you can have a private room, that's the best. Best to be at home where you can completely control it. But she said these days, most people are going to die in one kind of institution or another, you know. Very few people choose to die at home. That would be the ideal. Some people do that. You know, many people, and have the body stay for 3 days. That gives many people the creeps, you know, they don't like that because we don't want to know about death, you know. But that's the ideal scenario. And the room where the dying person is, it becomes like a shrine room. It becomes the only thing that happens in there is prayers and mantras. I mean, this, of course, is the Buddhist approach. And if you're your grandmother and she's a Catholic, and you have Catholic things, you can also do Buddhist things. It's okay, you know. Because the point is now, you see, after the breath has stopped and all the signs of life from the materialist point of view, the subtle mind, which is the mind that we experience in dreams, that's actually still your mental consciousness, but a much subtler level, you know, that's now functioning. Now, of course, you could be very easily, you know, many people like, okay, well, you know, when you go to sleep, the same thing, the first 4 stages will occur. And then when you go fast asleep, the 4 elements have ceased. Exactly the same thing has happened at the time of death, but it's not as dramatic because you're still breathing, but your sensory consciousnesses have ceased. So, you know, some nights you might sleep very deeply and you don't remember any dreams. Some nights you might have really vivid dreams, and that's your subtle consciousness. So some people, after they stop breathing, many of them can be still very vividly conscious at the subtle level. And that's what you've got to take into consideration, you know. So even if your loved one's in a coma, they can still be aware. I mentioned that experience I had when I was in a retreat, and we used to have a nap at lunchtime. It was in India in the 70s, and I became a nun. And I'd have, you know, after 3 months of meditation, and you might, you know, and might have these vivid dreams at lunchtime. But also I was totally conscious through my ear consciousness of all the things going on around. I couldn't see anything, but I could hear things vividly. This is not uncommon for the subtle consciousness to be aware of what is going on even inside the room. So for this reason, you totally stay peaceful and virtuous. You do not have anything else happening. And for that 3 days, it's like a holy place. Nothing else would happen in there except for mantras and prayers, you know. And people can rotate and come in at different times of the day. In the monasteries, they do it for 24 hours a day. You know, monks and nuns take turn. That would be this is the Buddhist point of view, the best way to help that person's mind. Because even though the karmic seed, this is the point that Lama Zopa talks about. Let's say the karmic seed that was triggered before they stopped breathing was a negative one. But once they've stopped breathing, their mind hasn't left the body yet. It's still by doing lots of prayers and practices, you can help shift that. You can help change the karma. But equally, let's say a positive seed is triggered before they stop breathing and their mind is in their body still and they've stopped breathing. That can also change if bad things happen and they're disturbed. You know, if you disturb the body, you can change the karma to be a negative karmic seed to be triggered. So it's so important to keep it totally peaceful, totally quiet. And the only things that occur are the sounds of prayers and mantras that invoke the Buddhas, bring the holy beings there, you know. The animal as well, so that you can't wish for a better way to help your pet die. So then the death process continues in the last 4 stages of the 8 stages. Again, there's this gradual ceasing of these different components. So roughly speaking, from the subtle point of view, the physical components, we've got this subtle nervous system, about 72,000 subtle channels throughout the entire body. And throughout these channels is running all the different wind energies. You know, like I mention often, the Tibetan medical system studies, it's similar to the Chinese acupuncture system and the Ayurvedic one, these subtle wind energies. And this is the basis of good health. So there's, you know, all these different wind energies coursing through all these channels, and all our different states of mind, the mental states like love and compassion and anger and jealousy, all different states of mind are linked to their own wind energies. They're all linked to the winds, and they're all going through this subtle nervous system, you know. So the subtle nervous system consists, the subtle body, this is the subtle body. It consists of the 72,000 subtle channels, they call it, the wind energies. And there's a third component, like a liquid energy, that's called Kundalini. And there's a subtle white Kundalini and a red Kundalini. And these are throughout the body as well. And the white one prevails at the crown chakra. And it's the basis of the capacity of the human body to experience pleasure, the pleasant feelings. And then the red kundalini, which is mainly residing below the navel chakra, both in the central channel. You've got all these channels, there's 72,000 subtle channels. You've got a central channel, they call it, which starts, if your spine went all the way to the top, it would start just in front of your spine, and it goes all the way down and ends at the penis for the boys and the cervix for the girls. Got two side channels, and they go up, and they go along down either side of the central channel, and also end at the cervix and the penis, and all the other thousands of channels. And then there are various points, because all these are all kind of constricted, all these subtle nervous systems are very constricted. So there's a whole bunch constrictions, they call them chakras, where all the channels are constricted here at the crown, at the brow, throat, at the heart chakra, at the navel, below the navel chakra, and 3 they call the secret chakras. They're on the outside along the penis for the male, and they're on the inside from the cervix upwards, inside for the female. These different constrictions of different channels. So this kundalini, this at the time of conception in your mother's womb, from the past life, let's say, this person who's dying, at the time they were conceived in their mother's womb, at the time of conception, when they started this life, what happened was their consciousness was in an intermediate state, and I'll go into this in a minute. When the mummy and daddy hopped into bed, or wherever it happened, to have sex, the consciousness leaves the intermediate state, the karma ripens, and they run like a magnet to that egg and sperm. So as soon as their subtle consciousness joins the egg and sperm are the grosser level of this, there's a subtler physical, the subtle white kundalini is the subtle energy of the sperm for the male, and the subtle red kundalini is the subtle energy of what they call the blood of the female. So the male and the female, the egg and the sperm, this subtler white and red kundalini and are actually what your consciousness joins with. They join with the egg and sperm, but the subtler energy that the egg and sperm hold are called the white and the red kundalini. And that your consciousness joins that white and red kundalini. And then that's the beginning of the first second of that life for you. And it starts at the heart chakra. You begin at the heart chakra, and then gradually throughout the period of the fetus growing in the womb, the whole fetus grows. So this red and white kundalini are at your heart chakra all your life. They're right there, what came from your parents. So this gradual process of death, this deconstruction of the grosser, ever grosser components, everything, the 8th stage of death is when all there is left is this white and red kundalini, and they call it an indestructible drop, which is conjoined with your very subtle consciousness at your heart chakra. So anyway, the 5th stage is the white kundalini that's prevailing at your crown chakra, starts to melt down the central channel, and it comes to the heart chakra. And other things happen as well, but there's a vision of and certain levels of your mental consciousness sees as well at each of these stages. And then there's a vision of like a white sky. Lama Zopa calls it very particular things, but here's Lama Yeshe, I think. What does it say? Anyways, everyone describes it differently. Here it's a clear emptiness filled with white light. Then next is the red kundalini, which is prevailing at your navel chakra, just below your navel of your own body. This comes up to the heart chakra, and there's like a red vision, and again small levels of your mind cease to function. And then the next stage is what they call the black appearance. There's like a red vision then, and then the next one is these two, white and red, come together at the heart chakra, and it's like a subtle unconsciousness. Like a subtle unconsciousness. The yogis will be aware of all this. We're not aware of it. And then it's like what they call the dark appearance. And then when these two open, this indestructible drop opens at the heart chakra, that's then the clear light consciousness, which is the subtlest level of your physical and mental energy, the subtle clear light consciousness, and it's inextricably linked with this subtle wind energy, which is in this indestructible drop, which you got from your mummy and your daddy. And when that drop opens, that's the time of death. but often it just stays there for up to 3 days. It doesn't leave immediately. But when it opens, then your very subtle consciousness, or your clear light consciousness, the subtlest level of your consciousness, will then leave the body. And that's when death occurs. That's actually death. Of course, there's no physical sign of all of this. That's why, doing all these experiments, trying to find any indications of this existing, That's a rough description. Very, 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 very rough. So this meditation, you can do it every day. You can go to sleep trying to imagine this process, getting used to it, becoming familiar with it, because like anything, when you're familiar with something, there's no fear. If you live in denial of something, you're afraid of it, And the yogis, of course, have practiced all their lives. As Lama Zopa says, there's a chapter in his book called Death is What the Yogis Have Been Waiting For, which sounds hilarious to us, sounds like ridiculous. That's because this technological process that occurs at death, the yogis spend their lives in their meditation practicing going from the gross to the subtle to the very subtle level. That's why death is what they've been waiting for, because the most radical level of subtle consciousness occurs at the time of death. So it's a very fascinating process, a very fascinating thing to think about and learn and understand, There's many books published on it. One of Lama Zopa's, but there's a really good book that's a commentary by His Holiness the Dalai Lama on a commentary written by the Panchen Lama on this process itself. It goes into more depth. It's a wonderful book edited by Jeffrey Hopkins, and it's called The Mind of Clear Light. The subtitle is something about death, but I really recommend you read that. It's so fascinating. The Mind of Clear Light by His Holiness the Dalai Lama, edited, translated by Jeffrey Hopkins. He goes into more detail about this process. It's a wonderful book. So that's roughly speaking the death process. I think now you can ask me some questions. 8:37. Look, it's already time to go. It's not fair. I'll wait a bit longer. I won't go yet, I promise.
Okay.
So now ask me some questions, you people. Come on.
We had one person a little while ago. Juhi, do you still have a question? It was a little while ago. Maybe it was answered already.
Yeah, anybody? Lou's got a question. Yeah.
Okay.
I did have the question about grasping at the time of death, and I was wondering, is that like a wish to not die?
I think it's way more subtle than that. It's just totally primordial, Of course it is that. I mean, in general, we know the fear of attachment is losing something, isn't it? You understand, it's just a general wish not to lose something. Well, the deepest attachment here is more than attachment to your family, more than attachment to your possessions. It's attachment to this very person. It's the most primordial attachment we've got to this sense of me. It's totally instinctive. You understand? Juhi, does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Wish would mean something that you are conjuring.
What, darling? What?
Wish would mean the word wish at that time would mean that you have it in control. But what you are suggesting is that it's not in your control.
It's just instinctive. It's totally deeply instinctive. Yeah. It is technically a wish, yes, of course, but it's utterly deep and instinctive and primordial,
Okay.
And it's the deeper, and it's the attachment to more than anything of losing this me. And of course that means the body, doesn't it? We think we are the body. It's attachment to the body.
Yeah.
And there's a sense, because we think that's who we are. That's the deepest, most primordial fear. And that's the one that ripens at that point. Yeah, exactly. And that's why, as Lama Zopa says, it's so skillful. Like if your mummy is dying and she's a Catholic and she's got faith in God, you can help her think about God, think about the future, think about going to heaven. Then she can look forward to that instead of clinging to this. Because the fact is, death, you can't stop it. You've got to let go at some point. So the fear can be tremendous. So, but if you're a materialist, of course, you can't tell a person about heaven. And if you're a Buddhist, you can talk about thinking, at least planning throughout your life and practicing creating the karma to live a good human life and look forward to that. That can at least calm the mind down. It's a skillful means. Lama Zopa says it's using attachment wisely to look forward to something. Do you understand the point?
Yeah, I'm thinking about my parents, both of
Yeah.
who I think
They have a religion. They have spiritual power.
they did. Both were Hindus. My mom died in 2014, long, painful illness in the hospital, surrounded by my sister and my brother.
Yeah.
did not want to go. She
That's
hung,
right, darling. Precisely. That's right. Exactly.
she hung on. But my father, mobile, no problem as such,
Really?
independent, by himself 2 years ago, just left in the night,
That's
turning
interesting.
with his hand like this.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah,
There you
but
go.
peaceful, I would
Yes.
say.
Let's hope. That's the one. And that's where you see that a lot of in Lama Zopa's book, many of the chapters are the various things you can do to help the person be ready for it. If they're called dying, if they're in their bed, you know, and one of the common ones is simply a whole bunch of what to talk about. So, you know, it's like, you don't have to sort of, I mean, this is where if they're Christian or whatever, you can remind them of certain things to think about. Remind them to think about God, that God loves you. God is wonderful. You know, heaven, whatever suits their mind. You've got to know where their mind is and what they like, you know, and that can help them just get some courage, something to hold on to that's pleasing and can help them, support them, have less fear. You know, you have to know your loved one's mind well to know how to help them. Do you understand? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Don, dear. Thank you so much, Julie. So yes, Lou.
Lou.
An organ donor. If you're an organ donor,
A little bit louder. I don't know. I can't hear. I can't hear you so well, darling. Sorry.
if you're an organ donor
Yes.
and you're conscious when they're harvesting your organs, subtle consciousness, you're not feeling anything. If you can keep in your mind the compassion behind what you're doing, then you keep from changing a positive to a negative seed by holding on to that compassion.
That's right, Lou, of course. The ideal is that it would be, but it'd be most unusual to be conscious at that level, at a subtle level, unless you've really practiced, unless you're a yogi. Yes, of course, no question. But fortunately, in some way, fortunately, most people will be unconscious when they take the, you know, so it won't disturb their mind. But if you can, of course, but it'd be very hard unless you're a great yogi. Because, you know, like I mentioned this in the past quite often, that, you know, in the same way that you can be aware of what's going on while you're dreaming, you can also be aware of what's going on once they think you're dead, but your subtle mind can be functioning while you're having the operation. All those experiences of people who have the experience of floating above their bodies while they do the operation. So that, you know, that can easily happen when you're technically dead and your subtle mind can be aware, and then you'll freak out completely because you think, what are they doing cutting my organs out? And they realize I'm not dead yet. So unless you're a great practitioner, it won't be that friendly, Lou. So it's better not to be conscious. Most people won't be disturbed by it, you know. Do you understand, Lo? But you're right, of course, technically.
Yes, but if you are conscious by some freak chance, like floating above your head.
You practice that, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But you can't, unless you've practiced before, it won't happen naturally. You got to have practiced that. That's right. Yes, Paolo. Hello there.
Thank you for your teachings.
Okay.
My question was around how do we understand these teachings from the perspective of the two truths?
What do you mean by that? It's a bit too broad a question.
In the sense that the experience of death is an aspect of a relative truth, which is deceptive in some ways. So how do we bring these beautiful teachings while also cultivating our wisdom in terms of ultimate reality?
Well, I mean, the only way I can answer that, Paolo, of course, it's a relative reality. It's true. It's conventional reality. Death is part of conventional reality. But the only way to bring in the ultimate reality is by meditating on emptiness all your life. There's no other way to say it. I mean, everything is empty. Death is empty. The death process is empty. It's dependent arising. I mean, yeah. I mean, of course, it's conventional. This is what we're dealing with. But if the only way to bring emptiness into this experience is by being a meditator and by knowing every day. And then when you realize there's no ultimate reality, no ultimate death, there's nothing to be afraid of a death. So I don't know how else to answer your question. I can't quite get the meaning behind your question.
Okay.
Can you say some more?
Well, I think I was just thinking in terms of also dispelling the fear of death.
Also what?
Like in terms of dispelling the fear of death.
Yeah, well, that would be because if you realize emptiness, then perfect. If you realize emptiness, or if you understand emptiness, then there would be no fear of death at all. Of course not. That's the whole point. It's
And
right.
bringing,
Huh?
bringing that meditation in at the time of death.
Of course, that'd be the most perfect one to do. And in
Yeah.
Lama Zopa's book, because several of those he's got, one of them, meditation, one of the really good meditations to do is to think of death being a dependent arising. And therefore, as soon as we understand dependent arising, then we eliminate the fear. Of course, no, absolutely. That's a very specific approach, absolutely. So that would be the best approach to have. I mean, bodhicitta and then understanding emptiness, then there will be no fear. Of course there won't, because then when you realize emptiness, there's no fear. Absolutely. So there's a way of meditating on, I mean, in Lama Zopa's book, he's got a little meditation on meditating on the emptiness of death, how death is just this and this and that. And absolutely, I mean, anybody can do that, you'll be fine. Absolutely. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to hear your...
Yeah, and of course, the other one is from the Vajrayana point of view, and this is the Lama Zopa's chapter called How to Fail, that the death is what the yogis have been waiting for. I won't do it today, but I'll read it out next week. I might have read it to you already. It's really moving because it's, if you're a Vajrayana practitioner and you've taken an empowerment, and especially the highest yoga tantra empowerments, those are structured in such a way that you incorporate completely in this. When you do the generation stage meditation, you dissolve into emptiness. You totally combine that with the death process, and then you combine meditating on emptiness and coming out of that. You combine that with the enjoyment, transforming it into the enjoyment body, and then when you get reborn, when you visualize being reborn, you mix that with the Namanikaya. So there's a perfect way in the Vajrayana for a person who's got an empowerment to completely bring the three, to use death, intermediate state, and rebirth into the path. That's the best possible method, best way to die. We'll discuss that next week.
Thank you so much.
All right. Okay. Yes, Zalo.
Yes, thank you very much, Venerable. I was thinking, I mean, it's a question I've had for a long time. You know, they say that rebirth happens, you know, inside the 7 weeks after death.
They say that
That's
it can be up
correct.
to 49 days. It can be up to 49 days before your mind leaves the body. It doesn't follow every time, but that is what they say.
Right. Because the difference between Lama Yeshe's death and his reincarnation, I don't remember his name, was more than 1 year after.
That's right.
That kind of puzzled me, you know, like why.
Oh, the holy beings,
that...
holy beings can do what they like. They can stay in meditation in subtle state for years if they want to. An ordinary person has no choice because we completely have no control over karma. We don't have control over the death process. So a normal person, you'd be reborn, you know, your mind would leave, I'll go into this next week. When your mind leaves the body, you wake up in this intermediate state, like a dream state. And that can be up to 7 weeks. And then when that's finished, you automatically take a rebirth. Automatically. But the holy beings, they don't go through these stages. They're in complete control. So they can stay in a subtle state of bliss. They can be in a pure land. They can do what they like. That doesn't apply.
Right.
They have control.
That makes sense.
Yeah, that's the reason. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Who else then? Questions, people?
Any other questions? Samuel.
Yes, good, Samuel. Hello there.
Hello. According to Buddhist cosmology, there are rebirth states without a body.
That's right.
What karma is rebirth in those states triggered by?
Well, you know, okay, let's talk about briefly. As we know, Buddha would assert a whole kind of spectrum of types of rebirth within samsara, within the desire realm of samsara. So you've got, as a result of virtuous karma, as a result of lots of virtuous karma, like lots of goodness and virtue and good ethics, one of those results would be to be born as a god, which is really equivalent to what the Christians call heaven, the Muslims call paradise. I don't know what the Jews say, because no matter how many Jews I speak to, no one can ever tell me whether there's heaven or not. So you Jewish?
I'm
You
Jewish, but I'm not a religious Jew.
Religious. Okay. Well, I don't know what the Jews say because they've got different views. Anyway, but a God realm birth for Buddhism is the result of lots and lots of virtue, goodness. So when your mind is programmed in goodness, that purifies your wind energies. And then when you die, you're born in this subtle state of incredible bliss. Your mind is joyful and blissful. That's what they call paradise and heaven. It's a similar idea in Buddhism. So the cause of that, so you're basically your body is subtle light. You know, this is how they talk, all the angels, all that kind of business. That's a God rebirth. And that lasts for a long time. Then you got a human rebirth, which is also the result of virtuous karma. And that's not a light body for sure. Then you got the animal rebirth, which is not a light body. Right? That's right. Then you've got another type of very suffering rebirth, which is mainly the predominance of incredible grasping energy. And because all of us, our minds are all beings in the universe, according to the Vajrayana, are naturally connected to our own set of the 4 elements. So you could argue that the people who are the hungry's ghosts or the spirit realm, the ones that are a result of grasping energy, their minds are conjoined with, you could argue their minds are conjoined with air energy. They can go in, they can possess other beings, they can flit around, you can't see them. So their body would be like subtle air energy. The air element would probably prevail. And then you got the hell beings, and you could argue their minds, which is the most suffering, their 4 elements are mainly manifesting as fire. Their minds are conjoined with fire elements. You could argue like that. So the ones we can see that have a physical body are the humans and the animals.
But what about the formless realms?
Okay, the form and the formless realm are 2 different other realms of existence that the Hindus talk about. And these beings, these great yogis, have gone into the deepest of deepest meditation. They don't have, even in the formless realm, they only have mind. They don't even have the other elements at all. They're not even manifesting. They're just subtle, concentrated mind.
So is it still attachment which triggers rebirth in those realms, or is it something else? What is it, the karma?
The main cause of that type of rebirth is the mind is super concentrated. And for them, that's the end result. That's liberation. But for Buddhism, they haven't realized emptiness yet. So that'll eventually run out and they'll be back in the lower realms again, or the human realm. So that's just the result of intense, subtle concentration. The mind is just deeply absorbed in subtle concentration. There's no physical manifestation again. There's no physical manifestation. Do you understand? Yeah, okay. That's it.
Juhi has another question.
Okay. Thanks, Samuel. Yes, Juhi, talk to me, darling.
Very quick one. I'm still not clear on the realms. How do we, as a consciousness, decide or go into a specific rebirth or form?
Okay,
Like,
we don't decide. Okay, so we don't decide, but the law for the Buddha, and this is similar to the Hindus, of course, the law that runs the universe. No one runs it. No one's choosing anything. It's a natural law that if you create lots of virtue and lots of goodness, and you program your mind with goodness, and you program and you purify your subtler energies, then you will just be reborn. You don't choose it. You will just be reborn as a god. Or if you choose it, even if you'll be very virtuous, but you can want to be born as a human. So you don't choose it so much as create the cause to get a human body. So you got to sort of, there are always causes. So the cause of getting a human body is mainly non-killing karma, non-harming karma. And then you combine it with lots of virtuous practice and spiritual practice, then you will be reborn as a human. You don't technically choose it until you're highly advanced. The great yogis can literally choose, but you create the causes, as the way they put it, karmically, and you'll get that result.
Okay, sorry, one follow-up question on that. Let's say that I am an angry human being, and at the time of death, I could potentially go into a lion or some angry animal form if I have not cleaned up my
Yeah, and
karma.
or if you haven't practiced, because we've got billions of karmic seeds, Juhi. We've got billions of karmic seeds. So you could argue a person who spent their life being fairly negative, but they transform themselves closer to the time of death and they start practicing virtue, they could die peacefully, and that could override the negativity, and they could be triggering a virtuous karmic seed that they've got in their mind stream. They've got these virtuous karmic seeds, and you can be fortunate and die well and get a decent human birth. But, you know, we've got billions of karmic seeds. Until we're highly realized and have realized emptiness, we've still got billions of karmic seeds. That's why it's so important to die well, to ensure at the time of death, one of your virtuous karmic seeds is triggered. So yes, if the mind is freaking out at the time of death, even if you've lived a fairly good life, if you're freaking out and are not handling it well, that can easily trigger one of your negative seeds, and you can get a lion rebirth or something like that, for sure. That's why death is such a powerful time, to help people navigate it so they can make sure they get a decent human rebirth. Do you understand?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that does make sense.
Yes. Okay, darling. Thank you. So, yeah.
Sabine.
Oh, Sabine. Okay, Sabine, sweetheart. Yes.
Hello, hello. Can you hear me?
I can, sweetheart.
Some years ago, my grandmother, she died, and I was with her, and she was like very small and skinny, and she was in my arms, and she was really very happy to die. She asked like 10 times, can I go now? And we said, yes,
Really?
go.
Good.
And I was also always so happy about that, but
Yes.
she had dementia.
Yes.
So my father says she's just crazy. She doesn't know what she says, because she thinks her grandfather is still alive and that they will meet each other. And I said, oh, I would like to die like that, if you're sure you are reunited with your.
Sure. If her mind was peaceful, it doesn't matter what it doesn't matter about her dementia. If her mind was peaceful, that could easily have triggered a good virtuous seed. Could easily have done that, of course, darling.
Oh, I'm happy then.
Yeah, that's right. It's possible, very possible.
Okay.
Darling. And you were helping her and loving her and taking care of her. That's what was special.
Okay.
Good, darling. Good.
Thank you.
Yes, Mark. Hello.
Thanks, Venerable Ravina. I'm just thinking about what you said about the main cause of human rebirth is non-killing and accumulating merit. But I'm also thinking about all the past lives, and who knows what I've been up to in those past lives.
Yes, exactly.
So I could have a lot of negative karma.
That's right. Yeah.
So I have to worry about that, or I have to think about that as well, do I not?
Well, no, I mean, that's why, you see, there are two ways of preparing for death, Mark, and we're going to go into more detail, of course. Living your life by living in vows, which is totally stupendously amazing to help you constantly create non-killing, non-stealing, non-harming karmas 24 hours a day. So you stock up your bank vault, if you like, with billions of really good, delicious, virtuous seeds, and to purify every day. So you put atomic bombs under the negative seeds. There's still karma there, but you're creating so much virtue just during your daily life, then death is really easy, because you've stocked up on lots of virtuous karma by living in vows and purification. They're the two main ways to live your life within the reality of impermanence, and then death really will not be a problem. And one of the virtuous karmic seeds will be easily triggered. This is
okay. So what I do in this life then, accumulating virtue, purifying, can nullify.
Absolutely, not so much. It is nullifying. Every second you're living in a vow, Mark, you're putting atomic bombs under millions of tendencies to kill and steal and lie. Of course you are. And you're purifying the karma. And every time you do the purification practice, you're doing the same. So there's no question you're doing masses and masses of hard work, creating the virtue and purifying the non-virtue. Until you've realized emptiness, you're not going to get rid of all of them, but at least you're putting lots of delicious ones available, and you think about impermanence every day. So death will really be fine and you'll be okay. It won't be a problem. You're purifying every second you live in vows. You're purifying. That's what Lama Zopa says. Just being good is not enough. We'll talk about this more, especially when the karma module comes, but I'll mention all this next week. So you really, when you live a good life like that, not just being like a nice person, but living in vows, you're purifying and creating merit and doing the purification practice, these are the two best practices, plus living within the reality of impermanence, then death will be totally fine experience. You'll have no problem.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, okay. This is really practical methods, you know. What else is there, Tara, darling? Anybody else?
Looks like we covered everyone.
Oh, I'm very happy.
Anyone? And if you don't mind, Lars is about to share the screen and we'd like to do the long life prayer for you.
Oh, come on, you don't need to do that. It's okay. I'm all right. I'm not.
Please,
well, who knows? I might
just
die.
about to share.
Okay, come on. Then.
Thank you.
Okay,
Blessing.
guys. Thank you so much.
Good. A prayer for the long life of Venerable Robina. Mother of the victorious ones of the 3 times and 10 directions, Dharmakaya, the great bliss embraced by great compassion. My perfect Arya Tara, who in an ordinary form are the guide for us pitiful transmigratory beings left guideless. How kind you are. May all your wishes be instantly fulfilled and may your life be stable until samsara ends. O mighty one, you who destroy all the enemy of delusions, who reveal the Dharma of scripture and realization, spreading it in the mental continuum of transmigrating beings, thereby eliminating the 2 obscurations, including their imprints. How kind you are. May all your wishes be instantly fulfilled, and may your life be stable until samsara ends. By the blessings of the Guru, the deity, and the Dharma protectors, and unbetraying actions and their results, as well as the truth of ultimate reality. In all my lifetimes, may I only please and never displease for even 1 second the Guru. And may all the vital points of my prayers be fulfilled. Blessings. Your mic. Microphone.
Venerable, your microphone.
Microphone.
Okay, sorry. So yes, okay. Between now and next week, really get familiar with this death process, please. Read about it from the course notes. If you've got Lama's Opus book, read that. Just that section, so you get familiar with it. It's really, really helpful, you know. And I think we'll go. I mean, because this is So we'll yeah, that'll do. And we'll meet you. I'll meet you next week.
Blessings. You're venerable.
All right, darling. Thank you so kind, so much, everybody. Much love.
Be well.
Dedicate all these seeds we've planted in this 2 hours we've been together, or an hour and a half. May they ripen as quickly as possible as our Buddhahood, so we can be a better sentient beings and make compassion, bodhicitta, grow and grow in the hearts of all. Thank you, everybody. Much love, darlings. Thank you, people.
Thank you very much, Venerable Robina.